Good evening. I'm Natasha Del Toro, and I want to welcome you all to World Channel's Meet the Makers. Thanks for joining us tonight. World Channel and America ReFramed is thrilled to bring you the documentary 5 Years North. I know many of you that are joining us tonight have already watched the documentary, but if you haven't, tonight we're going to show a few of the clips and you can watch the entire film after this event. We're going to be sharing that. You're going to be able to see it on streaming on World Channel and on the PBS app. So you can go to worldchannel.org to find exclusive articles, behind the scenes features, and a whole lot more. And if you subscribe to our newsletter, you can be notified of more events like this one. Now, before we get started, just a few little housekeeping notes. I want to explain how this works. If you're new to Zoom webinars, you're not going to see yourself on video and you're not going to be able to speak during the event, but we definitely want to hear from you. So you can ask questions by opening up the Q&A tab. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A tab and you can type in your questions. And we're going to try to get to all of the questions that we see. But for those of you, other ones that are joining, if you see a question that you want to hear the answer to, then you can vote for the question by clicking thumbs up and move it to the top of the list. And like I said, we're going to do our best to get to all of the most popular questions and all of your questions tonight. But first, I want to introduce our wonderful guests tonight, our filmmakers, and also another guest who's here to talk about some of the topics in this film. First person we have is Chris Temple, and he's the director of this wonderful documentary. Hey, Chris.
Hey there. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us tonight. It's really exciting to get to talk to you. He's the director along with Zach Grassi, and they're both the founders of Optimist, which is a nonprofit organization. They create films with impact. They're best known for directing feature films, Living on $1 and Salam Neighbor. And something that is really cool is every film that they make, it's accompanied by an impact campaign that is meant to empower the film subjects and its partner nonprofits. Their projects have raised over $91 million for the film's causes, which has changed over 275,000 lives. That's incredible. Congratulations. And congratulations on this great film that you all made. I'm really eager to talk to you about it. We also have Alejandro Valdés-Rochin, who is the editor and co-producer of 5 Years North. You're from Mexico. Alejandro's an award-winning documentary filmmaker, editor whose collaborative works have been released theatrically and digitally across National Geographic, PBS, Al Jazeera, Red Bull TV, and Discovery. And his recent credits include Maxima and Science Fair, which was a sort of darling at film festivals in the United States. Also, we have Elena Zarandona, who is a psychotherapist, joining us tonight. Elena, she's the owner and clinical director of a bilingual mental health practice. She specializes in trauma and life transitions and has been working with the Hispanic undocumented population for over 10 years, evaluating individuals for the immigration process and with adolescents in the juvenile justice setting. Elena is also originally from Mexico. So I want to welcome all of you tonight. One of the first things we're going to do, since I know a lot of people did watch the film, but not everybody has. So we want to show you all the trailer of 5 Years North. This is an incredible coming of age story of an undocumented teenager from Guatemala. It's the story of Louise, who came to the United States to work and study and try to better his life and avoid the ICE officer who's patrolling his neighborhood. So maybe we should just watch the trailer.
Aló? Acho que anga. Ano para mí en tu iPhone, please. Mucho, ¿no? It's this one.
Police, we're conducting an investigation, sir. We're just gonna ask you a couple of questions, okay?
My mother's from Cuba and my father's from Puerto Rico. They don't want me to do this anymore. Your wallet too? You sure?
He has 6 kids.
Te vamos a extrañar mucho.
It's sad that things like this happen.
We left our country because
Tengo 75,000 quetzales mi deuda. 17 dinero para mi familia.
I'm not gonna tell you that we never arrest a non-criminal because I'd be lying.
Me siento marreo, me siento débil. Tengo miedo. Primero Dios no me van a agarrar, no me van a deportar.
The problem here is that someone who's a criminal is in the same category as someone who's not a criminal. And it just keeps getting to be more and more. How do you keep up with that?
Aquí la vida no es fácil, pero tenemos que aguantar. Más después nos vamos a ser un poco más felices, ¿no?
Luis, ¿cuántos años pensás hacer aquí en mi gobierno?
Pues
So I want to ask Chris, what is the big picture of 5 Years North?
Yeah. So, I mean, this film, its goal was to provide a really deeply personal lens at an issue like immigration that's so polarizing and that's always talked about in political sound bites and kind of with agendas behind it. And we wanted to really get into, the human story and oftentimes the human cost that happens behind these policies. So we really just tried to take the time to embed and to be there with a few, individuals who are a part of this system.
And why did you all call the film 5 Years North?
Yeah, so the name was actually inspired by Louise in many ways, where, him and his community, they all talked about this vision of coming to the US from Guatemala, being here for only a few years, about 5 years. That was always the plan, was to come for 5 years, make enough money to send money back home, to support their families, kind of get this leg up back in Guatemala and sort of a nest egg, you could say, and then go home and be back with their families. And it was just this really new way of thinking about immigration, where to me, I'd always sort of imagined this idea that someone comes for the idea of staying forever, and I think this really challenged that. And the more we dug into it, we understood there's a real history of that in the US, of what we used to have, of a policy of much more seasonal labor visas, of people coming for a few months, working to meet labor demand needs in the US and then going home. And it really inspired us that, maybe the system that we have isn't actually designed for the reasons why people sometimes come. And I think there's just so many, push and pull factors of why people come to the US, and we wanted to expose a new one of those.
And to understand that sometimes people, yeah, they ultimately want to go back to their own countries.
Yeah.
Did Louise stay for 5 years? Is that, you know, is
No, I mean, I don't want to ruin the film for everyone here, but
all right, yeah, maybe we can get to that. We don't want to spoil it for people. Let me ask Alejandro. One of the things that I found so fascinating about this film in particular was this juxtaposition that you all had between Luis and Judy, who was the Cuban American ICE agent. Talk to me about the structure of this film, including this juxtaposition.
Yes, I think what we were trying to do primarily was there were two things. One was to allow for our audience to empathize, to listen to both characters, kind of regardless of what they were doing. Luis is coming here undocumented. Judy works for ICE, which is an agency that is controversial in many areas. And we wanted to sort of offer our audience points of contact that would allow them to listen to their dilemmas, their goals, what they're concerned about, etc. And I think we organized the film keeping that in mind. I think the other two things are we also wanted to organize it in a way that would sort of in a way pass the baton from one character to the other, so that there would be juxtapositions between their experiences, their concerns. So even though they're on opposite sides of the immigration debate, they are concerned about very similar things. So organizing the film in ways that would emphasize that was of great concern. And just lastly, the other thing I think was with Louise, we were very concerned about the audience not judging him too much, understanding that he's a kid, not an adult. Louise, when he got to the US, was a 16-year-old kid. Very immature, strong but immature, and we were very aware that the way in which certain segments played would either present him as more mature or less, and our audience might judge some of his actions in ways that perhaps were not helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and that's something that also, as politicized as this topic of immigration is, you can't help but feel for whatever anybody's view is. You can't help but feel for this kid in New York City who's trying to make his way. Somebody just wrote in. I wanted to share with you all a comment from one of our audience members. She said, Catherine Nelson wrote in, the comparison contrast between the two grandmothers was so striking. Luis couldn't be with his grandma when she passed away, which was one of the really heart-wrenching moments of the film. And Judy, the ICE agent, she refused to leave New York City because family is everything. So, that there were it's a really interesting juxtaposition. Also just seeing some of their core values, their similarities as human beings. I think that really comes across, even if their immigration statuses are different. Now, Chris, I understand that you've actually known Luis for 10 years now. How did you meet him and his family in Guatemala?
Yeah, I mean, I met little Luis when he was 8 years old. I mean, he was this, tiny, bubbly little kid. And I basically, when we started this piece, we never intended to make an immigration film. I met Luis in Guatemala when we were making our first feature documentary, a Netflix film called Living on $1. I'd been filming with him and his community, looking at how innovative the extreme poor are to survive at that level, and understanding more about the complexity of extreme poverty. And then I just continued to keep in touch. We'd go back each year. We were Facebook friends. I mean, the amazing connection you can have internationally with people, right, in this day and age. And then in 2017, I got this phone call from, a friend in this community, actually Luis's cousin, and she told us, that Luis and his cousin Chino were lost in the desert, that they had tried to come north and no one had heard from him in 5 weeks, right? And it was this moment that just sort of threw us headfirst into trying to navigate the immigration system ourselves, because we tried to figure out where he was, which detention facility he might be in, what happened, what was the coyote system, the smuggler system that had maybe got him here. And he did spend about 2 months in detention, and then was released to his uncle in New York City. And we went and we met him on his first day being released in New York City. And that's the day that the film begins, really, was, charting for this child to try to navigate the most complex system in the world. I mean, people compare it to tax law and its complexity, and I think it blows it out of the water. How people can try to work through this world, and he had to do it as a 16-year-old alone who could barely speak Spanish, let alone English.
It's remarkable. I've lived in New York City several times now, and as an adult, and I have to say it's incredibly challenging to get your bearings there. And I can't imagine a kid coming from such a different context and who doesn't speak English. And I know that, there are so many people like Louise that come all the time and figure it out, but it's incredible that you all were able to capture that journey for him.
And we wanted to capture the joys too, right? I mean, I think like that, the opening scene to me was this beautiful moment where we're with Luis in his third day in New York, and he's seeing Times Square for the first time. And to me, watching him look up at these buildings, and he's talking to his mom on the phone, trying to explain what this is like. And, it reminded me of, I saw New York in a new light, just like seeing it through his eyes of this, this wide-eyed wonder of the contrast of him growing up in this tiny little rural village in Guatemala and now being thrown into New York City. And to me, that set the framework for, the whole film and his experiences as a kid in this new world.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing. I mean, I think one of the things that's very unique about this film in particular is the access that you were able to get. You were there, you guys were there for so many key moments. It's really incredible. How were you able to get this access with obviously with Luis's family, but also with Judy's family, the ICE agent?
Yeah, so I mean, with Luis, thankfully we'd had this relationship since back in 2010. We developed this friendship, and good films, I think, are built on trust, right? It's a two-way street. He had to trust us. His family had to trust us of who we are, what story we would tell. And so that was really freeing to allow us to try to get beyond just the superficial level with him, and like what were the real moments. And some of the best moments of this film were captured when I was sleeping on the couch in their apartment in New York City with 10 other young immigrant kids, and at 1:30 in the morning when Luis would get back from work from cooking in a local restaurant all night, and would be hanging out with his friends and catching up. Like, those were the moments that I'd never seen in a film before. And it wasn't about hearing policymakers talk about immigration or the challenges someone might face. Like, I wanted to be with him in that and just like see what it was like. And so it did take that sacrifice sometimes just to be there with a camera. We did not have big teams. Zach and I ended up shooting a lot of this film ourselves, just on a C300 running gun, like one camera. And that allowed for some of those moments. And then, our approach with the film was to, again, I think its strength was in those personal moments. So we decided to not put in any expert interviews. We did not want, an academic talking about the history of policy in between these moments with our characters. So we just started filming instead with the forces that were impacting Luis's life. So that started with his lawyer, then his teachers, then his uncle Mario, who is his sponsor, his friends. And then the one that we just could not ignore was ICE, right? It was this looming presence in his life and all of their lives of this fear constantly of ICE being in the background and having to be nervous about deportation. So we reached out to ICE. It took almost a year to get permissions to allow them to truly let us film, and not just film, a single day with an agent, but to go deep and to understand, somebody like Judy, not just as an ICE agent, but as an individual, where she began working at ICE before it was ICE. She'd been there for 18 years. ICE actually began in 2003 under the Department of Homeland Security. Before that, it was under the Department of Labor, which was a very different, institution and thing that was happening there that's now shifted over time. And so being able to talk with her, understand her, have family dinners with her, was something that I think no one's ever seen in a film before.
Well, let's go to our next clip, which I think is really, speaking of Louise, we have a little update for our audience. So let's watch the next clip.
Hola, Dios los bendiga. Mi nombre es Luis. Estoy muy orgulloso de ser parte de esta película porque siento orgulloso. O sea, gracias por los amigos que me han ayudado, que tomaron ese video. Les quiero contar un ratito que la vida de un migrante es difícil vivir, no es tan fácil. ¿Sabes? Porque uno llega acá sin familia, sin padre, sin madre, es muy difícil. Uno está solito aquí, el trabajo y todo el sufrimiento, ¿no? Y el cansancio y todo eso, pero sabemos que tenemos un Dios grande que nos ayuda, que siempre nos toma de la mano cada día y que nos lleva a trabajar donde quiera que nosotros vayamos. Y solamente les doy gracias a todos. Dios los bendiga. Bye.
It's great to see Luis in his suit. I imagine he's like in Central Park there. I don't know. Before we launch into questions, I also want to remind our audience to please send in your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to get to all of those. So any questions you might have, please, we want to hear from you. My next question is for Elena. Elena, what does America represent to immigrants and their families?
That is a difficult question because like we have been hearing, the idea of what the United States represents has been changing. In the old days, it was the American dream. It was coming here and doing better. Usually it would be one generation that comes, sacrifices so the second generation can go to college and they don't have to go through the suffering the parents had to come here. They do better, and the third generation is the one that comes and changes policy or something like that, so and we have been seeing that through time. However, now that it's becoming more difficult for people to come to the United States, and now we have the trauma from crossing the border. Before it was just being in the desert or finding some wild animal, but now you have to be looking for cartels that would come in and try to do something to you. ICE, and now they have I don't know, something like the horse patrol that we just heard about, or weapons or different things. So it has become more and more hostile for people to cross. So this idea of the American dream, people are saying, now I'm considering. Before it would be easier, just go for a summer and see what happens. But now it's becoming more and more of a concern. So we have to understand that the people that come here nowadays is because they really need to be here, because otherwise in the conditions in their countries, like Honduras or El Salvador, especially where they have so many issues with maras and like gang affiliations, they are experiencing a lot of trauma, a lot of conditions, hunger, lack of employment, hostility towards women, so there's many issues, and they're coming now as refugees. They're not just coming as looking for this American dream or doing better. It's survival now,
And Alejandro, would you say that the American dream still exists?
I think I am a little bit with Elena on this one. I think, I mean, obviously, I'm sure someone else might have a different opinion, but I think to me, it's more about access to resources and safety. And this might be at a survival level, you know. People need money to support their families, or they may need shelter to protect them from, you know, insecurities. It could be weather, it can be violence, etc. So I think the American dream might be there for the second or third generation, but for the first one, I think it's more of a scramble for resources, especially the most vulnerable people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's still like this idea of the American dream, though, is it's a powerful lure. Even if there are now many restrictions, many policy restrictions and realities when they come here that may make it much harder for people than they would have imagined. Let's watch our third clip now to see what kind of experience Louise had, you know, somebody coming to the United States trying to better his life, but also having to juggle school and work obligations.
Filament or a gas like neon.
Yo digo que yo voy a estudiar hasta que voy a graduar aquí en los Estados Unidos para que yo me quede aquí de unos muchos años, ¿no? Pero a veces salgo tarde de mi trabajo y me voy en la escuela. Como 3 veces me fui a sentar allá en el baño. Y cuando llegó el del director, me dijo, ¿por qué estás sentado en el baño? ¿Estás durmiendo? Dice. No, es que tenía mucho sueño por eso. ¿Por qué tienes sueño? ¿Estás trabajando? No, no estoy trabajando, me dice. Oh my gosh, sí estás trabajando, por eso tienes sueño. En el trabajo, si llegas tarde, si te faltó 2 horas, 1 hora, ya no tienes trabajo. Si haces deliveries, tienes que ir rápido. El delivery está muy peligro también si te atropellan. Pero ¿qué hacemos? Ya estamos aquí, echar ganas y todo eso, pagar mi deuda, y después de mi deuda quiero construir una casa como mi tío Mario.
Elena, I have a question for you. You're a therapist, a psychotherapist. I want to know, how does separation affect a parent and a child and their relationship?
You know, it depends on the relationship they have before, you know, but in generalizing, you know, of course, the child is going to have to become, to a certain point, parentified, you know, so at that point, they're going to share the role of head of the household, you know, like in the case of Louise is very resilient. I have to say that something that Louise has is resilience, and a lot of kids will not have that. And he comes from a family that is very supportive. So in this case, there's a scene in the movie where in the documentary where he's talking to his dad, and it's almost like the two of them are the heads of the household, and now he's watching over his siblings, you know, and so he has that responsibility. So this separation in his case gave him a very, very strong sense of they depend on me, you know, so you don't even have permission to feel bad or weak or lonely or anything like that, because they depend on you, you know. So in other cases, you know, had he not been so resilient, you know, this separation might lead to drug abuse or alcohol or something like that to cope, you know. And from the side of the parent, You know, we see very little on the side of his parents, but you can see the burden that the mom has, you know, to not be able to take care of her baby, you know, he's my child, he's still a child, and I can't be there for him, you know, and so it creates a lot of guilt. You know, if we were to take this family later on and, you know, put them in a therapy room, it would be there would be a ton of guilt, a ton of we should have done it this way, we should have done it this way, and then eventually forgiveness and understanding why, you know, we did what we did. But something that happens with many of these families is that, you know, is this sense of what is normal for us to say, okay, I have time to think about this, and is this the best option or not? They don't have time to do that. They just have to do it and do what their duty calls them to do. And the emotional part, you know, goes to the wayside, you know, and it's almost never discussed, you know, so.
Yeah, and it was also, I mean, it's one of these things, watching this child trying to navigate school responsibilities with his working, you know, very long hours, and the struggle for him alone, like without a parent there. Are there available resources for kids? And this is for all of you. Are there any available resources for kids who should be going to school over working, since that was it was really difficult for him to manage both of those things?
Well, can I go?
Yeah.
I wouldn't call it resources, you know, because unfortunately the system is built for protecting the child, in the sense that it's like, oh, you need to be at school because a child your age should not be working, you know. So in order to go to work, you need to have parental permission to work before the age of 16, you know, and then that would be from 14 to 16. So after 16, certain places will allow you to work, but it's a certain number of hours. So that's the way it's stipulated. But in the case of Luis, that he has to work, you know, and there's nothing really established until he turns 16, you know, or until he turns 17 in certain states. It depends, you know. Then he will be able to have like a half-time school load or something like that. But it goes state by state and circumstances by circumstance, you know. So it's difficult. It's very difficult.
Mm-hmm. And for Alejandro and Chris, you know, and Elena, there's this underlying theme of fear in the whole documentary. And, you know, throughout Luis's story, he has fear of being deported, fear of being fired from his job because he's late. He has fear for his family because they're in Guatemala and they might lose their property. They don't have enough money. There's illness. How does the past administration and the current administration and immigration system in America perpetuate this fear?
Want to go first, Alejandro?
Yes. Well, I mean, I think it's, you know, it is there in the discourse. It is, you know, that politicians use to dehumanize immigrants, brown people, Black people. It is there in policies, you know, like the previous administration decided to start rounding people who were not criminals, although they may have been undocumented, but they were not criminals. So it sort of took an all-sides approach to this issue. And you can see it, I think, in the current administration also, in some of its messaging, to you know, people in areas like Central America and Haiti, you know, telling people not to come, the border is closed, etc. You know, those decisions may be taken for political reasons to protect, you know, the partying power, etc. But you know, it is used constantly by politicians. Yeah.
And for Luis was he was in a detention center before he was released to his uncle Mario's custody in New York City. Did you speak to him? This wasn't covered so much in the documentary, but did you speak to him about his time in the detention facility?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, and he did open up quite a bit about what it was like in those facilities, and and yeah, and he has pretty horrifying descriptions of he was there for multiple months, alone as a 15-year-old. He had his birthday while he was in detention, and he actually told us this really amazing story, and a little bit of it is in the film. But for his birthday, there was a nonprofit that actually provides teddy bears for kids who are in detention, and for his birthday, he was given this teddy bear, and he just talks about. He just had this huge smile that came up across his face of like what that bear meant to him. I mean, as this 15-year-old kid, just like being alone and in this really a prison. And it was the one friend that he really had. And he actually ended up sending it back to his family in Guatemala for his little sister because it meant so much to him. So no, I mean, I think it was a really hard experience for him. He spoke only Cachiquel, which is a local Mayan dialect. And he actually learned Spanish mostly in detention from other kids that he was talking with. And, he's an incredibly fast learner, really dedicated. His English now is actually quite impressive. We speak, he refuses to speak to me in Spanish. I'll speak to him in Spanish and he'll speak back in English because he was really trying to practice using Duolingo and other phone apps. But yeah, I mean, the private detention system is a prison system, and we should be very clear about that.
Mm-hmm. Elena, what there are thousands of children like Luis who have been detained. What are the mental health implications, that they're going to experience from what you've seen?
This is a traumatic experience. I've always remember when I was like going through the questions, this question always reminded me when I started working at the Juvenile Justice Center, and they put handcuffs on us to understand what being handcuffed felt like. Mm-hmm. And immediately, and I know it's a drill, immediately I feel dehumanized and I feel ashamed and embarrassed and I feel taken down as treated like less than, Now imagine, this kid is coming with all the good intentions of taking care of his family and everything, and then he's thrown into this detention facility, which is horrendous. The stories that they tell you is they have this one place that is called the hielera, they call it, so it's kind of like the freezer. So It's super cold. There's no beds. They feed him a sandwich with a slice of ham or bologna or something like that 3 times a day, And then from there, they go to what is called the cages, which is jail, kind of, they give you a uniform and everything, and they dress you like an inmate, So it's a tremendous traumatic experience, and the reason why I know all these stories is because when I do the evaluations, I have to go through the entire trauma to justify to immigration that there is trauma for them to be able to claim citizenship or this residency based on traumatic experiences, but that 90% of the traumatic experience is going through immigration and through the immigration process, So the implications for these children, especially, a lot of them are separated from their parents, when they're minors. That's a whole other topic of discussion that we could use like 3 hours talking about, but it is so definitely, they're going to have nightmares. This is a typical that I see. They would have nightmares. They would have separation anxiety. It doesn't matter if they're 16, 17, they would be either very attached to their parents or very detached from their parents. You would see that certain diminishment of emotional expression. You would find them is either very isolated or very outgoing, changes of mood, so they would tell me like, my kid is not the same one since we left, our country, than the kid that is now with us here, of course, because they have been through a traumatic situation. So also anxiety, depression, that's very common, so
And I think that's just the time in detention, let alone what the month may have been like coming to the US. And then I think it's important to note, what life may have been like before that, right? Of, looking at all of the push factors of why someone might come to the US or make that journey, from issues of violence and gangs that we've already talked about. But to take Luis's situation, he grew up in a situation of really abject poverty where there wasn't enough food on the table every day, where he was, having to work 12 hours in the field. And, I remember him, yes, I remember him being, thinking actually that bologna sandwich was amazing. And he talked about that, right? Like, and it was this really sad relative comparison point, right? Of realizing, this is a kid who's grown up maybe just eating corn tortillas with salt, and that was it. And so, I think recognizing and remembering always and where people are coming from in these situations. And that's why we really wanted Guatemala and the community to be a character in this film, so you could spend time with Luis's parents and really see and feel, how he grew up.
Mm-hmm. And then after the detention facility, the detention facility, and then having to learn how to navigate New York City and get a job and go to school and everything else.
Yeah, that too.
Kind of amazing.
Learning the language, coming to another country, there's drama galore, so.
It's really important that you all captured this element. I don't know if people can always put themselves in the shoes of these children. We have to remember they're children, or even the adults who come, like what they're fleeing from and their experiences to get here. It's really important that you all captured this element. So I have a question from the audience that I want to ask to you all. I want to put out there. I know that there must be a lot of positive outcomes since the release of the documentary. Could you share some of them?
Well, the film released yesterday, but yeah, no, but
the last 24 hours.
The last 24 hours have been amazing. No, but and on a micro scale, I mean, the film released, and we have already gotten a number of messages and donations from people who want to help create change, right? And I think that's what these films can really be about. From they're the spark, right? Like, a film is a starting point. I want you to watch this and to then dig deeper. It's only 85 minutes. There's only so much we can cram into here, but I hope it changes something in your mind to think about immigration, or next time you go to a restaurant, think about who's cooking your food. When you order off of Grubhub, who's delivering it? Just some basic things to think about in your life that I hope will happen as a kind of a mind shift for as you go through your day to day. But yes, there has been some very particular and specific changes that have happened, since we first premiered the film in festivals and things, as well as, Louise has begun receiving some great mental health support. He's been able to see a doctor and be able to get some support where he was having mental health breakdowns, anxiety and panic attacks in the film that you see. And we've been able to get him some support from that, thanks to amazing donors who've seen the film and are supporting this. Since we finished filming, Luis has also paid off his smuggler debt and is helping to support his family back in Guatemala. Sending his younger sisters to school. And there's an amazing organization we're working with in New York called The Door, which provides, all these wraparound services for young immigrant kids. They don't have to be undocumented, but kids who, are just trying to navigate this system of legal and school and just getting mentors and support. And we definitely encourage you to check them out, The Door, and support some of that work.
The Door. They provide resources for kids like Louise. I have another question here from a viewer that says, being so familiar with Luis and his family, did you feel compelled to intervene and provide significant help, support, advice, funds?
Of course, every day. I mean, I think, look, we wanted to maintain the journalistic integrity of this film, and I think we managed that. I think we were able to create a piece that is really fair, accurate, and balanced. That is, was recognized by Columbia with a DuPont Award for its journalistic integrity. But that doesn't mean that I didn't, as a friend, want to and did encourage Luis at certain points in the film. When he had his court date, I was honest if he asked me for my perspective. I said, yes, like, please go to your court date. This is when it is. Let me help you do that. And I think there was this learning that I had of even my own ignorance, right? Like, I'll never truly be able to understand his perspective and the decisions that he had to make as a kid going through the system, right? And for him, going to school and going to court was not his right decision. And he decided not to do that. And he actually has found, a world that works well for him in the US outside of the legal pathway. But he's working, he's paid off his smuggler debt, he's helping his family, he's a lot less stressed now that he's not trying to work and go to school at the same time. And my kind of ignorant perspective that, oh, you're 16, you must be in school, this is the only path, I think he really challenged that, and he was right. And I think all of us should keep that in our minds when we challenge our own our own preconceived notions about what's best for someone else, because at the end of the day, they're experts in their own lives, and we got to spend a lot more time listening and asking, how can I help, rather than kind of spitting our own knowledge of what we think is right.
Well, and I'm definitely really happy to hear that he's getting help, mental health help. I think anyone who knows about anxiety and depression, which is a lot of us, could see that in what he was experiencing and how scary that must have been for a kid. One of the one of the interesting, very interesting aspects of this film is the juxtaposition with Judy. I mean, she and her intergenerational family add a whole layer of complexity to this whole conversation. And I remember she talks about in the film how initially, she's Cuban American, right? She talks about how she had misgivings in the past about her job. And I guess over time, maybe she became more desensitized to it. Were her actions at work not representative of her statements as a woman of color?
Alejandro, do you want to take that?
Yeah. No, I think Judy represents, the sort of the evolution of the immigrant experience in the U.S. That, it's some of it becomes more conservative, more right wing. It looks after its own interests. The Latin American community in the United States it's a huge has a huge how do you say abanico
a spectrum fan.
It's not monolithic.
Yeah, it's spectrum. It covers all kinds of political interests, etc. I think what we saw as we were editing the film was that Judy, as much as Louise, and I think this is really important, is looking for security. Given that she's a citizen of the United States, she has access, like many other minorities actually, to a government job, In this case, it happens to be ICE. It provides a paycheck, she's a single mom, helps her support her family, helps her probably support her parents, supporting, the grandmother, So I don't know that she would look at the sort of the ethnic sort of empathy, the way we would at this panel, or the need for that sort of interethnic support as we would in this panel. Yeah.
And for those who haven't seen the film, just something that's important to recognize about Judy, this ICE agent, is, we did learn through filming with her that, her own mother had spent 42 years resettling refugees, and that duality can exist within a single family. And for us, one of the most fascinating things I've ever filmed in my life was sitting at a family dinner and kind of hearing some of this conversation and the underlying tension even between, her mother and herself of reconciling the fact that, the mother's been doing this work for 42 years to bring people to the US and protect them and to help provide people this opportunity. And her own daughter is working for ICE in a way that, she's really struggled to understand how and why Judy does the work that she does. And her community has struggled to understand that too. And I think, we hope that the film delves a little bit into that identity and the challenges of that.
Another example of this issue, I think, it's happening right now, in the Rio Grande Valley, where the Haitian crisis was happening. A lot of the CBP agents are Mexican Americans. All right. And the economic opportunities in the area are limited. Working for Customs and Border Protection offers these people a regular paycheck, probably a ladder to climb up to a middle class existence. So it's it's tricky.
It's fascinating, but also important to note they're all looking for the same thing, some security. It's just some people have legal status, they can be here legally, and others can't, but they're all seeking the same thing: security and to better their lives for themselves and their family. I want to turn back. We talked some about mental health, and I mean that's such a big component of this film. So I want to shift back, and there is another clip that I want to play for our audience.
Muchas cosas vienen a la cabeza. A veces no me siento bien, me siento marreo, me siento sin fuerza, me siento débil.
Mi cabeza duele mucho y no me siento bien. Ayer trabajé, pero me caí y me desmayé. Necesito dinero para mandar a Guatemala. Es que estoy acá en Nueva York, no me siente bien. Es que sí me siento bien aquí, pero mi cabeza no sé por qué, no sé dónde estoy. Es que malameo, tantas cosas. Sí.
It's hard to watch. Elena, there was a moment in the film, well, this is for both Chris and Elena, there was a moment in the film where you hear him talking to his mother in Guatemala. And do you think that she understood what it was that he was experiencing when they talked over the phone and he was trying to describe to her what was going on?
Oh, I am convinced that she was heartbroken, because it's like you can hear the anguish in his voice, To me, that last picture at the end, he looks like such a little boy. Mm-hmm. And that's my mom would remember, So I got goosebumps just to talk about that. But it's like anybody that is a mom, would understand that your baby's gonna be your baby, and that's the part where there's a part later, I think, in the film which she shows how worried she is about him, So maybe not in the point to the point that there's like always a panic attack. I understand what a panic attack, but I think she understood that he was in distress and there was nothing she could do about it. So.
Right. So she could probably hear it in his voice.
Yeah.
But tell me, how is mental health perceived in Latin America? I mean, I know there are some differences in how it's talked about and how it's perceived.
It's changing slowly, but there's still the idea of mental health is. I get people that don't want to come to my office, for instance, because they say I'm not crazy, So like, so this idea of I have to be crazy to be in therapy, or they would say, oh yeah, it's a sign of weakness. Oh, you're nervous, just tough. You have to toughen up, or you're depressed. Well, you know what? Go watch something funny, and that would get you off of it, And they it's hard to sell the idea that is part of the whole body, that we don't have any control over our mind or over what's going on, and why and we don't even understand why we're feeling the way we're feeling, So yeah, and then I wouldn't leave it only to the Latino community, I would say there's many communities, different groups that we have that same idea, men are more less likely to go to therapy, for instance, than women, and so forth, so.
And it was so interesting that he didn't know what it was that was happening to him.
Yeah.
If you could, how did these mental health struggles manifest physically?
Well, it's interesting because, for instance, depression has many symptoms similar to anemia or being dehydrated. So you're going to have muscle pains, you're going to have, you're going to be dizzy, you're going to be disoriented, you're going to be forgetful. And then we have to add, changes in sleeping patterns or eating habits. Some people will eat too much, some people will eat too little, I think that telltale for depression, because depression and anxiety are very, very similar. They're, I would say, almost they're cousins, that the one telltale is in extreme cases, depression would manifest with desire to not be alive, or suicidal ideation, which are two different things. One thing is to say you don't want to be alive. The other one is you want to die and you have a plan. Where anxiety is not going to have the suicidal part, but it's going to have this sense of impending doom. There's something really bad going to happen, and I don't know when. And you just live with that constantly, which, by the way, is something that undocumented immigrants live with every day of their lives. This sense of impending doom. So that's those I can tell. So I would say to people, if they have headaches, if they're not sleeping well, if they have tense muscles, and there's nothing physically wrong with them, it's probably a sign of some mental health issue, and I would say, seek some sort of help from your doctor or a therapist or something.
And this question's for Chris. When you all were filming, were you aware of what was happening to him?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully my mom is a therapist, just like you, Elena. So she's taught me a lot. I'm a big therapy fan through and through. But I think we learned over time what was happening with Louise, and I think it was very telling that he didn't have the vocabulary to describe what was happening to him. And the words that he would choose would be things like headache, like I don't understand, I don't know where I am. These things that in some ways were actually more descriptive of what it's like to be having a panic attack or an anxiety attack than just when someone tells me, oh, I'm so anxious. I think that word is actually just not descriptive enough. And it was so I think we do know what Louise was experiencing. And I think the hardest part of watching Louise go through it was, while you see the one call with his mom where he was really talking to her on the phone and expressing that he'd been having these nightmares and he was having these anxiety attacks, he felt so nervous to tell his parents what he was feeling. I mean, there was this idea with all of us, right? I mean, he's in the US, he's supposed to be the one who's providing for the family. He's the man of the family now. He's also, in the greatest country in the world in his eyes, right? And it's supposed to be this land of opportunity, and it can't be hard. He can't put that forward. And I think, you saw that in the film, and why we chose to use so much social media actually is, we all know no matter what community you're in, you put your best foot forward on social media. And that happens in immigrant communities for kids like Louise too. He wanted to show his parents the best side of what he was doing, and not show some of that dark underbelly of mental pain and anguish. And I hope that anyone can relate to that and watches the film, that, if Louise had the strength in the end to come forward and to look for help and to speak up, I hope others will too.
And the fact that he kept creating social media profiles on Facebook and just create a new one,
Exactly.
It's incredible. I really appreciate that you all captured this part of the story, that he was, struggling. You all really were able to capture it so well, and help us understand through his story how some of this depression and anxiety manifests, and why he would be feeling that way, given everything that he had been through. What are the biggest challenges facing undocumented children in the US right now?
Do you want to start, Elena, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I can go. I mean, but it's like it's like the list is endless. I think there's a sense of identity in general with young adults right now, and teenagers. So I do believe that immigrant kids, are really struggling with that, and in my mind, I go the whole gamma, like the kids that have just arrived, and the kids that have been here second generation, third generation, this sense of identity, who am I as a Hispanic? Do I belong to the country where I came from? Do I belong to this country? Do I belong to the group they put me in, just because, I'm brown, or do I want to have a totally different sense of identity, So, and with that comes once again a whole bunch of different other things that would show us the struggles, addictions is huge, suicidal ideation is huge, among adolescents, and it's not, I mean, used to be that when I used to work with gang members, the Black community, the kids would say, no, that's a white kid problem, being suicidal. We kill each other among ourselves. We don't kill ourselves. That's changing, and it's becoming more permissive. Same thing with cutting, with self-harm, acting out sexually. So there's a lot of issues. So kids in general are in a very vulnerable situation nowadays with all the media and such. But imagine somebody like Louise that is coming from a small community, and all of a sudden he gets bombarded with all this, the Facebook and Twitter and all that, and they become part of their world. It has to be a tremendous struggle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these questions over identity and where do I belong? And then on top of that, being in a country where there's a lot of reinforcement that you don't belong, that they don't want you here. So that's, Chris, what work is Optimist doing to further the reach of the film of 5 Years North and to support immigrant youth?
Yeah, we're so lucky to be set up at Optimist as a nonprofit with incredible supporters who help make sure that we're not just creating the film, but we're putting just as many resources into amplifying the film's message, to creating curriculums around the film, putting on screening tours into communities that need to have these discussions, fundraising for organizations like The Door that are helping to address mental health concerns. So, we've been very fortunate to build out a team that's leading this impact campaign around the film. We have, an amazing impact producer, Santiago, who's been just knocking it out of the park and leading this team and helping to provide this film as a tool, and that's what it is at the end of the day. We want the film to be useful. It's a starting point. This is a conversation. And yes, no one film can ever capture the full immigrant experience, right? But these two films, these two characters are not representative of all immigrant experiences, but they can bring you into into these worlds, and there is kind of a universal story that's able to be learned by going really in depth with them. So we hope that people will come to 5yearsnorth.org to bring this film to their own communities. We've got discussion guides, materials, extra resources, speakers, all sorts of stuff to try to have these conversations and take them deeper, because these conversations of generating empathy, of breaking down barriers between a more partisan line, I think is going to be key to coming up with some form of immigration reform as well. When the last time we had immigration reform in this country was 1986. 1986, when you think about how out of date our system is to keep up with the new, technological and economic realities of where the world is now. We got to think about this a little bit more and listen to people like Louise and Judy.
And it was 1986 under a Republican administration, and now it's become it's just so politicized. I hope that you're going to show this film in schools as well. I think that it would be important for people of all ages, but for kids too.
Absolutely.
And I would imagine that, people, myself included, watching this film want to get more involved. They want to know how can they get involved in this type of advocacy?
Yeah, from our side, I think there's so many amazing organizations that are out there doing great work. Again, we want to, our role, I think, as a film is to again, be a tool to amplify amazing organizations that are out there already. And people like Elena, who are doing incredible work, or organizations like The Door, Define American, ACLU, the International Rescue Committee. There's so many, a couple here that you're putting up. The Informed Immigrant is an incredible resource. Immigrant Advocates Network. There are people out there in your communities, and there are immigrants in your communities too, that, even if it isn't through a formal nonprofit donation or kind of volunteer engagement, I think all of us can just be better communicators and neighbors and listen to one another in a way that I think has become very, very hard in the last 5 years. So I hope that a film like this could be a starting point to bring your community together. If you host a screening, you have some common language that can help unite in a conversation, and to help have this conversation into the future.
It's wonderful. I want to leave a little bit of time. I know we're going to have to wrap soon, but I want to leave a little bit of time for Q&A, for questions from the audience. We've gotten some really great questions here, so I'm going to go through some of these. This question's for Chris and Alejandro. What was the hardest thing of making the documentary?
Why don't you start, Alejandro, and then I'll go. Was it having to deal with Zach and I in the edit? Because I'm sure that sucked.
No. I think, Chris and Zach were shooting for like 10 years. There were other members of this community that were part of the filming. There were other characters that we looked at, etc., that we spent a lot of time with. Learning that Louise was the character took us a little bit of time. That was difficult. I think it was difficult also to learn how tough things were for him, to handle that, and to make sure that our audience understood how bloody hard it was for Louise, that he was being crushed, that making sure that came through, and that people understood that he was a kid. That even though he may be doing adults' work, he's a kid. That was very tough.
Yeah, and I think for me, there's a couple of things that come to mind. One, obviously, we really, at the end of the day, we needed to protect Louise, and I think that's hard if working with an undocumented subject in this way, and his family. And so, we worked very closely with his lawyer throughout the whole process of editing the film, putting it together, understanding how Louise is not his real name. He doesn't currently live at any of the locations that were shown inside of the film. We had to work through all of these different ways and work with amazing organizations, again, like Define American and others, to tell this story in a sensitive and appropriate way. I mean, it's such a difficult topic to broach and to go into. So, I just feel incredibly thankful to, all of the authors, the researchers, the nonprofits, the team members, the translators. It takes a family to make these films. I mean, we had 46 translators alone on this film who speak Cachiquel and English, and helped to go through almost 500 hours of footage to put this together. I mean, it really was such a group effort. And, I just feel infinitely thankful to the team, and especially to Alejandro, who had to watch every minute and navigate through this at the most granular level to put this piece together.
Mm-hmm. If I can add something real fast, to me,
please.
the triumph of this film, and that's I have watched it I don't know how many times at this point, and it's like, it's just that and the reason why I was excited to get involved with this is the humanity. You guys managed to capture real people being human. There's no villains, there's no bad guy, there's a struggle of Judy and Louise on the other side, but they're human beings, that and this is life, and that's what makes it so beautiful.
Yeah, we need more representations of human beings when we talk about some of these difficult topics. Here's another important question. Charles Sai, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, asks, for Chris, does this type of migration really help the community of Pena Blanca, where Luis is from? Are there better ways for that community to rise out of poverty than risking this trip north?
It's a great question. It's very clear when you go to Pena Blanca now of the stark difference between families that have sent someone to the US and those who haven't. And you can just see it visually. I mean, you see in the film, actually, Mario's home, Luis's uncle in New York, he's been sending money back, and he's built this giant home in Guatemala, nestled into the hillside next to, these adobe mud hut houses that Luis and other families are living in. And you see this stark difference, kind of back and forth. And it's just known amongst the community who is there, who's gone to the US and who hasn't. And obviously remittances are a huge source of income for countries across Central America. And they can be, a very powerful tool. And there's a reason that throughout, US history, we've had, as I think I mentioned earlier, a lot of people would come for seasonal work and then go back home and kind of meet needs and then go back home. Is it the most effective tool of development? I mean, no. I think we've seen that there's a lot of tools in that toolbox that we need to be using and utilizing to empower local communities to lift themselves out of extreme poverty. And I think at its core, poverty is at a backbone of so much of migration. And you can't look at just immigration as a singular issue. It's so infinitely tied to the communities where people are coming from. The poverty, violence, corruption, even issues around family planning make a huge difference. When you look at immigration from Mexico, for example, we now actually have net negative migration with Mexico. And I think one of the biggest things that's being heralded as causing the immigration levels from Mexico to really decrease is what we've seen in the birth rate around Mexico, where the average family size now has dropped from, I can't remember the exact numbers, but somewhere over 6 to about 2.5 in a family, and economic opportunities have risen around Mexico. And so if there's opportunity at home and there's safety at home, there isn't that same push factors for migration that you're seeing. So, I think a lot of the work that we do at Optimist as a nonprofit was started and inspired by the work around development that can be done around the world, in communities all over the world. And I think that always needs to be looked at as a part of migration.
Well, I hate to have to leave it there because we have more great questions from audience members. So I apologize for not being able to get to all of them, but I appreciate everybody writing in and participating in this conversation. And I just want to congratulate the filmmakers on telling this incredible story. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I hope that it is seen far and wide. You can watch, for everybody out there, if you haven't seen the film or if you want to watch it again, 5 Years North is going to be streaming on World Channel. It's streaming now on World Channel and on the PBS app. So you can go to worldchannel.org. And again, you can find exclusive articles, behind the scenes features, and a lot more. And please subscribe to our newsletter so that you can be notified of more events like this one. It was really my honor and my pleasure to spend this hour with you. I hope you all stay safe and stay healthy. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, PBS. So excited.
Yeah, thank you for having us.